Well, Mr. President, there was a lot said by Senator Brown, and you have to listen line by line, and we could spend all day responding. But I have in front of me the JCF periodic Serious and Violent Crimes Review. Right? You look at the 20, I'm going to get into all crimes, but let's discuss murder. You look at the 2014 numbers, Mr. President, of murders per month. In 2014, which I said in my last presentation on the extension of state of emergency in Kingston and St. Andrew, I pointed to the fact that in 2015, Mr. President, virtually every month saw an increase in the numbers of murders over the corresponding period in 2014. So in 2015, Mr. President, the trajectory was clear. In January, for instance, you had 74 murders in 2014. In the same period in 2015, you had 103 murders. We can take any other month because it's only one month that was less than the period the year before. The trajectory was clear. The uptick in murders and the uptick in gang activity started actually in Q4 of 2014. The articles support it. All of the statements put out by the police support it. The fact is the trajectory of increasing violence and violent murders and gun crime started at the end of 2014. That is a statistical fact. Of the same document, I said in the last presentation that last year is not a good base year. It's not a year that we are proud of. It's not a year you should be proud of. It's not a year that the country should be comfortable with. I stated that in the last presentation. However, so I said let's compare to 2015 and 2014. And let's look and see if we've turned the corner or not. Let's look at May 2018 versus May 2015. In May 2015, there were 110 murders. In May 2018, there were 102 murders. In June 2015, there were 102 murders. In June 2018, there were 84 murders. In July 2015, there was 112 murders. In July 2018, there were 102 murders. Mr. President, the trend continues. Up to September, at the close of the month, there would have been 101 murders in 2018, as opposed to 114 murders in 2015, Mr. President. The fact is, all of my comparisons, even when they show negatives, have been against base years that were better than last year. Because I agree, we must target far greater reductions than we have seen. We have said that. At the end of the day, the Prime Minister has also said we must first target a murder total below 1,000 persons per year, Mr. President. But you asked some questions and you raised several points. But the statistics are here, and I'm happy to share if anybody doesn't have them, even though I know they're widely available. For instance, we have said, and I did in my comparison last year, that the target must be, from my perspective, first and foremost, getting better than where we would have been in 2014, because that would have been the best year of the previous administration. And the fact is, the way the police classify reported crimes is in serious and violent crimes, in the categories rather of serious and violent crimes, and in the category of accusatory crimes. When you compare the category, the individual list, which is 7 types of crimes as they classify it, in 5 of the 7 categories, Mr. President, there are reductions, significant reductions when compared against the same period in 2014. In accusatory crimes, which includes robbery, break-in, and larceny, the reductions are 51%, 54%, and 66% respectively when compared against the same period in 2014, Mr. President. When you look at serious and violent crimes, which includes aggravated assault, rape, shootings, and murders, with aggravated assault, you're down by 48%, Mr. President. In the case of rape, you are down by 41%, Mr. President. In the case of murder and shooting, we have said, and the country knows we have had a challenge. Shootings against 2014 numbers are up 7%. In the case of murders, they are up 30%, which is why, Mr. President, you needed extra special measures to take, Mr. President, this matter in hand. So we are not celebrating or cartwheeling the extension of a state of emergency, but we are also saying to the country that we must acknowledge that whether you have declared one, we were living in a situation that all Jamaicans must feel was an emergency for a very long time. The average murder total since 1970, Mr. President, was up to 750 murders a year because of how the numbers have performed over the last 20 years. It pushed the average up. You know, they say we have done an abysmal job. They say, you know, the country is not better. And let's look at the alternative, Mr. President. You know, I'm very sincere. I'm very sincere. You know, there's no numbers making up, and I'm happy to print from my document and circulate them. So, President, you know, we've seen an increase in gang crimes over the past, gang-related crimes. We've seen increases in shootings and murders, Mr. President, over the past 20 years. And it is not for want of trying that successive administrations have not necessarily got the matter in hand. Senator Knight will tell you that during his tenure, my understanding is you brought 42 or 43 pieces of legislation or amendments to existing legislation to give yourself the regulatory framework to take the matter in hand. Still related to the crime fight, and that's an admirable amount in terms of trying to bring the amount of the legislative framework for the crime fight up to the challenges you are facing. I think that's positive. The problem, however, that you face, Senator Knight, is that the last time I checked, you're not the leader of the opposition. I'd be happy to support you if you're going forward for that position, but you're not the leader of the opposition. And after your tenure, though, Senator Knight, as Minister of National Security, there was a gentleman by the name of Peter Phillips who became Minister of National Security. He can't boast the same record of legislative work in his tenure there. He can't. In fact, I leave it to you to tell us, or to your side, to tell us how many pieces of legislation he actually brought to improve that framework to get the crime numbers under control. And it wasn't because crime started trending down under his time. It was in excess of 1,670 murders in 2005 that the country faced when we became the murder capital of the world in that year, Mr. President, under Peter Phillips' time. So the fact is, the problem that we face and the scourge that we face is not new. It is not normal. It is not something that should give us comfort. The fact is, I could argue that when we hit 1,674, we should have declared states of emergency then. Yeah. And the question shouldn't be asked why we're extending now. The question should be asked, why didn't you, Dr. Phillips? No, we didn't, you know, Senator Lambert Brown. Senator Lambert Brown likes to talk about Bowser, but he forgets and often never, well, I don't think if he's ever mentioned a particular gentleman that was dubbed as the godfather of the lotto scam in St. James. We are debating the extension of particular measures in the parish of St. James. We cannot talk about the measures. We cannot.
Mr. President, just a point of clarification, Mr. President.
Hold on.
Mr. President,
hold on.
a point of clarification.
Hold on. You know, all the look I look in the standing orders, I don't see something named, sir.
Mr. President, I just want to clarify for Senator. Hold on. I want to clarify for Senator Samuda.
Senator Brown, you're standing on a point of what?
Clarification.
I don't see it in here, but
No. But a point of order. I want to clarify for Senator Mathew Samuda that I wore a red shirt today
a clarification.
to fend off the duffy
Senator.
of Bebe.
Mr. President, I agree with that, Senator Hill. Mr. President, when you look, sure. In the Minister of National Security's contribution in the sectoral debate, he quoted an article from 1970 that was published in the Jamaica Gleaner then. And when he read it, it could have been published last week, it could have been published the week before, it could have been published any date over the last 20 years. It spoke to the issues, the social issues, and what they had created by way of the increase of crime within St. James. The fact is, St. James has had a rough ride with two particular scourges that have triggered and funded gangs over the last 20 to 30 years. They had the influx of the drug trade, certainly I believe late 80s into the 90s and early 2000s, which gave hell. Particular measures were put in place to attempt to bring that into place. But the next, or into control, the next scourge that impacted the St. James gang situation and the violence that we see there is the fact that lotto scamming brought millions of US dollars into play and funded criminal gangs. So you cannot talk about St. James and the crime fight there without putting it into context that this gentleman, who is described by US law enforcement as the godfather of lotto scamming, fueled this scourge. And when you talk about one or you talk about the other, you didn't condemn all. I stand here today and I'm happy to condemn all. Mr. Brown. Telling what? You know, Bebe was on.
Hang on, please, Senator Brown, please continue, Mr. Samuda, so you can complete in time.
The fact that this gentleman was on the management team of the West Central St. James executive was of course, who was described, yes, the PNP, who was described as the godfather of lotto scamming, and we are here today using a measure that the Constitution allows to bring crime and violence under control in St. James. No one has said, Mr. President, that this is a permanent measure. I have said repeatedly that the measure is but a tool that the legislative framework allows. I have pointed to the 5-pillar crime plan many times and said, let's stop the hypocrisy and saying there is no plan. I've even said I would be happy to entertain criticisms and suggestions as to how we can improve that plan, as opposed to saying there is no plan. Senator Brown also asked some pointed questions. He asked how many firearms have been recovered since the declaration of a state of emergency in St. James. Mr. President, the security forces, the joint security forces in St. James have recovered 76 illegal weapons, Mr. President, in the parish of St. James since the declaration of state of emergency. If that doesn't give you cause for concern and acceptance that you were facing an abnormal situation, then I don't know what will. On top of that, Mr. President, that figure, they recovered 1,542 rounds of ammunition, Mr. President. Each one could cause a death. Now, it is an alarming, in my mind, those figures are alarming and concerning and frightening. And if we don't think we need to use every single item of power that the law gives us to achieve these sorts of figures, I don't know how to convince you otherwise. The facts are, Mr. President, the World Bank has said crime costs this country in excess of $68 billion a year. Their estimate, not mine, but I'm sure they've worked the metrics in how they calculate that. If we get crime under control, Mr. President, we won't be arguing about growth figures. This country owes it to itself to rein in this monster once and for all. And we have no illusion that there's a silver bullet that will do it. There will have to be many measures that have to be taken. But, Mr. President, there are some other figures that the country should be aware of. Because when we say, what is the benefit? What is the benefit? The fact is, the health services have said, the public health services have said it costs up to $400,000 a day to treat gunshot victims. Now, as asking Dr. Langmore, on average, how long gunshot victims spend, and of course it would vary. You'd have those depending on the severity of the issue that spend a day. You have those that spend in excess of a month. So it's very difficult to work out that total figure based on what the information we have. But with 209 fewer murders, fewer shooting incidents, Mr. President, this year, you're looking at, if it was one day, which we know it is far below, you would be at 83 million for each day, for each one of those incidents, at minimum if they spent one day. If it's up to 2, you can work it out. If it's up to 3, if it's up to 3 weeks, you can work it out, Mr. President. The average cost of a funeral, Mr. President, is significant. 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, depending on where you are, it's very heavy. If you work it out in the context of at $400,000 average, Mr. President, the Jamaican people have saved a further $108 million, Mr. President, with the reduction of 271 murders, Mr. President. So we talk about businesses and the inconvenience they face. What about the families that have not lost loved ones, Mr. President? What about the families that don't have to say, how are they going to survive because the breadwinner has been gunned down, Mr. President? The ultimate human right is the right to life. And what this government is doing with these measures is acknowledging that there is an issue and saying we will do everything in our power to protect the right to life for the citizens of St. James, Mr. President, and certainly for the citizens throughout the country. Mr. President, a number of fallacies are often, or incorrect things are often stated. Mr. President, the facts don't support some of what Senator Brown just stated. No, that's what he put forward. The minister has 3 communication consultants, Mr. President. I have searched and messaged everybody that is there and tried to find 10 consultants, Mr. President. I can't find them. The compatibility issue you have, Mr. President, with cameras is related to the donation of body cameras, Mr. President, which is being resolved with the donors. So I don't know where Senator Brown gets his information from, Mr. President.
Senator Brown, come now, Senator Brown, set an example for young Senator Crawford now, please. Senator Samuda, move along, please.
Mr. President, I went to St. James on Wednesday of this week, and I was afforded the privilege of speaking with their Chamber of Commerce. There is no pushback against the state of emergency from the business leaders in St. James. I had the opportunity, because I arrived early, to visit some police officers that I know. They believe this measure is necessary. I had the opportunity to visit with councillors and members of parliament, because I arrived early, and you met them in their constituency and their respective divisions, and you spoke to people. Certainly in Catherine Hall, when you go into particular areas, there was no pushback. They are able to keep their stores open when they at one point had to be shutting because gunshot was firing, Mr. President. So it's all good and well to say sometimes people have to close early. And I give you the context. Mr. President. Our neighbor, one of our very close neighbors in the Cayman Islands. I don't know how many have had the opportunity to visit there, but you can't find anything open beyond 8 o'clock. And their economy is booming. So this will not have the impact, that the fear that is trying to be raised by closing those things. We have to adjust our culture and adjust our approach to things if we are to take this scourge under control once and for all, Mr. President. Mr. President, I support the extension. And in closing, I ask that we do not send irresponsible signals to the country. And we don't engage in facile reasoning when the facts are before us, Mr. President, if it pleases you.